Thank you so much for joining us, Julie. We have gotten a lot of emails and questions from parents about these wildfires. And one of the most frequently asked questions is, how do parents talk to their kids about what they're going through?
I think this is a critically important question, and I think there's a variety of answers. So I'm going to do my best to help people think it through in different ways, because more than anything, you know your family, you know your child the best. And so I think parents need to lean into recognizing that they're going to choose the strategies that best work for them and their family. And I like to empower parents to do so. One of the things I think is important for us to think about is the age or developmental stage of our kids. So we're going to not talk to a 2-year-old in the same way we're going to talk to a 5-year-old or a 10-year-old or a teenager. And so really we're going to change what we say or how we say it, perhaps the level of detail depending on, again, age or developmental stage. And sometimes those are matched and sometimes those are unmatched, but I think that's important. Really giving space to understand or to allow your child to talk about how they're feeling. I think sometimes as parents, as a parent myself, I feel like I need to give all the information, but perhaps all the information is more than the child is asking for and more than the child is able to kind of manage or make sense of. So one of the things that I do a lot with my own children is really kind of see where they're leading me. What questions do they have? And I think more than anything, it's creating opportunities for kids to be able to ask you those questions. I think just like we are trying to navigate kind of making sense of all that's happened, our kids are also looking to us to see when it's okay or if there's space to ask us questions. And so really carving out time with our families to provide a space to say, you know, how are things going today? How are we feeling? Do you have any thoughts about this? For younger kids, I actually like to maybe even use feelings words like, maybe you're feeling sad or perhaps you're feeling worried. I think oftentimes younger kids, even school age kids, elementary school age, might not be able to kind of articulate or figure out what the feeling is that they're feeling. They just know that they're feeling off or uncomfortable or sad or bad. And so I think sometimes also giving some narration and creating opportunities to say, I have been feeling worried. How are you feeling? Or, and being okay with showing that you have feelings too, right? I think sometimes as parents, we really want to shield our kids from any hurt. And I think that's natural as a parent. And so we're not maybe expressing how we feel or sharing, or maybe we're kind of doing it with adults, but making sure the kids don't see it. However, I want to have parents consider, showing some of those emotions so that you're modeling to your children that it's okay for them to show their emotions too, or talk about their feelings, and that it's okay to talk about those feelings. Otherwise, I think unintentionally we have the potential to create spaces where we have to feel like we have to pretend that everything's okay. And so really providing an opportunity to share our feelings. And again, that might be created by the parent, that might be opportunities through things like reading books or watching something on television, kind of what we like to call teachable moments, or opportunities to spark conversation, or just really letting a child know, like, today I'm feeling really sad about what's happening around us is okay.
I can imagine they're also probably going through a lot of emotions. These kids have lost, some of them, everything: their friends' networks, their school, their home, their possessions. Maybe talk through that process. Is it a step-by-step, or does it come in waves? How do parents look for that?
I really appreciate this question, because I think this falls really into the category of grief and loss, right? And so if we know about grief and loss as a topic, we know that it's not linear. It's not that we go through specific stages at a specific rate or time frame, and rather that these are going to come and go, and they may have periods where they're more pronounced. You may have times where your kid seems like everything's fine, and that actually feels kind of off to you because you're like, things aren't fine. How are we, acting like we're fine? But then it might pop up in different ways for them later. With younger kids, we might see regression behavior, right? So that they are doing activities or doing things that they did when they were younger, that they had you felt like they had grown out of, but perhaps they're seeking comfort. So that might be something like sucking a thumb or having a stuffy that they really want to connect with, that you feel like, okay, well, you're at an age where you typically hadn't been doing that anymore. And just recognize that that's okay and that that's typical, and to allow those things to happen, right? Not to kind of unintentionally feel like shaming or punishing children for kind of regressive behaviors. I know some, even with younger kids who are potty trained, they might kind of regress in potty training, right? Things, because there's just so much out of control around them. Another thing that I think is really important is the best that you can do in whatever current circumstance you're in, to have some amount of routine that is typical to the child. So yes, you're not in your home. They don't have any items, or even most of the items that they had from their current space. And you're in, either a new home or you're sharing your space with other people. But the best you can do to have some routine. So for example, if every night at your home, you after dinner kind of played and then did bath time and then read stories and go to bed, then keeping those same routines in your new location is one way, I think, to help stabilize things for your child. And by the way, for ourselves, right? Routines are good for our kids, but are also good for us as parents. And then again, using tools like books or stories to help talk about hard things. I think one of the real challenges with grief is how we express it. And I think in younger kids, even teenagers, but particularly in younger kids and school age kids, it might come out they might not have the words to verbalize or articulate how they're feeling. And so all of a sudden we might see, behaviors that aren't typical of our child, or they're more frustrated, or they're quick to anger. And these are all typical ways that young kids who aren't able to yet kind of pull the words to say how they feel, they might be acting out through their bodies or through their behaviors. And so also recognizing that as a sign that maybe that child is really feeling sad or stressed or worried, and it versus they're just kind of acting out, and really thinking about how you might provide space to help them talk about their feelings, to help relieve some of what might be coming out as more physical behavior.
When you were saying that, the thought that came to mind too is I've talked to parents who have kids of different ages, and it feels like one age is going through something different than another age. How do you address that as a family? Do they do each one separate or in unity, or how does that work?
No, that's a great question. And I think, I've talked a bunch about younger kids, but I think it's important to talk about teens as well. And their needs are different, right? So if we think about age and developmental stage, the needs are different. So whereas younger kids might want more physical comfort from us when they're worried, right? Teenagers kind of may want a little more space from us, and it would be really typical for them to want to talk more to peers than sometimes to their parents. And I think we need to remember that, right? So perhaps like the best thing we can do for our teens is kind of be driving them somewhere to help connect with their peers and to give them places and spaces to do that. I think it's also important to remember that even though our older kids are much more capable of understanding what's going on, they also are much more likely to kind of pick up on our worries and stresses. And so I always recommend to parents that, we make sure that we have other adults in our lives that we're sharing our worries and stressors with, and that we're not utilizing our kids, or that we're reducing the burden on our children of using them as like a sounding board for some of our stressors and worries, because it's just developmentally really complicated for them to kind of know how to be support. And I think naturally kids want to make parents feel better, and don't always have the tools to do so, which makes sense. And so, I think that that's really important, is just recognizing that kind of our worries and stressors are important. Again, it's important for us to model our feelings to kids. We can be sad, we can be worried, but really kind of details about finances or about other stressors we might be having are really adult conversations, and really are important to try to keep separate from the conversations you're having with kids.
And I wonder if you're saying that too, maybe having them be a part of the process, like helping pick out something that's needed for the home or whatever that process is to help them feel needed. Is that something that you would recommend for the older kids as well too, or for parents?
Yeah, I think that this is a rebuilding of homes and restability is going to this is a long process, right? So I think that any opportunities in which children can contribute
Mhm.
always helps with anybody feel empowered, right? But it may be that that's about kind of their current space and then moving forward. I do think it's valuable when people know, and I don't think we'll know now, it's going to take some time, but when we have some knowledge about time frame or about, you know, that those things are helpful for kids to know,
Mhm.
right? How long might we be in the house that we're in or in the rental that we're in, or will we be living somewhere else permanently? I think also really thinking through or trying to think ahead of questions kids might have or worries they might have. And this is kids of any levels. Does that mean I have to switch schools? Does that mean I have to now attend school online? Like, what does this mean for me? What do the changes mean for me? And perhaps if there are opportunities to get some buy-in from your kids, right? So they have opportunities to contribute and say, I'd rather, be in this location versus that if we have two choices, because this is closer to friends, or because then I could attend this school in person, right? So if they're, I think for most of us, we're going to have to kind of, we're adapting so quickly and we're making kind of immediate choices right now. But in the next month or two, we might be making choices that have more long-term implications, like places that will stay for a longer period of time, et cetera. And
Mhm.
so having kids be part of that process, kids of all ages be part of that process, I think is again a way to empower them and make them feel like they're part of the decision making and part of the team, and that we're working together as a family. And I think anything that reminds our families right now, or us as parents, can help remind our kids that we're in this together and we are working together, is a plus, is a real benefit to everybody.
You've mentioned tools a couple of times, and before this, you sent me a list of resources that you put together, books especially that you say you work with as in your role. So let's talk about some of those. Especially, you said there's one book that a survivor of the Tubbs fire had written because she didn't have the resources. Can we just talk through some of these books that you've put together for us?
Absolutely. So that book is called Home, and it's on the reference list that I think, will have linked
We will
to
provide the
this
link.
conversation. And
Mhm.
so, yeah, this was a family who lost their home in the Tubbs fire, which was up in Sonoma County in 2017. And that mom had a school-aged child that was struggling with the loss of the home and loss of everything that was familiar to them. Couldn't find any resources specific to loss of home because of fire, and so wrote this children's book. So I think right now, for families who have had that specific experience, what an incredible resource from another parent, written by another parent, in response to kind of meeting the need for their child. There's also a book called The Terrible Thing Happened. And one of the reasons I like that book is because it doesn't ever name what the terrible thing is. And so it really can be used to talk about any worries or any challenge. And kids have the opportunity to kind of then tell you what that is. What is the terrible thing? And so I think that that's a nice kind of broad resources. The other books on the list, some of them are about just feelings in general, big feelings we have. I think some of those are great when a child is just kind of struggling to express themselves, and they're kind of having lots of feelings built up inside them, or maybe they're exploding, or maybe they're kind of acting out, and these books, I think, really help to normalize that, like recognize that we go through this and we kind of have to figure out what's causing that. And then others on that list are really kind of just general to grief. I would say to any parent, before you pick up these books, please read them. I think it's really important. Again, you know your child best, and it's always good for us as the parent to kind of read the book first, and see if it's going to be a good fit for our child, or feel like this is the right book for me to kind of help me generate or start the conversations I want to have with my child. I also want to note that so many of these books are available. They're being read by somebody on YouTube. So I recognize that we might not have access to purchasing the books, or some of our libraries might not be currently accessible, but do know that if you kind of search for these books and you click on videos, that often you can find someone reading the book. And so that gives everybody access to these books, whether or not we can get a physical copy.
You read my mind. I was going to ask you that because I know a lot of parents some of them are even out of state. They've had to relocate with friends and family that aren't here. So YouTube is, we'll make sure that we give the link for YouTube, and I'm trying to find it right now. But you also gave us another resource for parents that they could go through. Can you just talk us through that as well?
Yes. So this is a resource that was put together by the National Child Traumatic Stress Network. So I want to give them full credit for this really kind of important and useful resource. And that is really comprehensive. So there's a lot of links that are specific to kind of guidelines for helping children impacted by wildfires, or tips for how parents help kids navigate like kind of media coverage, because especially with our older kids or any kid that might have access to a smartphone, like they could be consuming content through social media platforms that actually they might feel like is useful to them, but actually creates a lot of overwhelm, right? And it's not necessarily items we're monitoring. So kind of how to talk to kids or give parents giving kids tips or having tips for parents on media. There's also some like activities that can be done to help conversations, but also kind of creative outlets and ways in which kids can express themselves. Tips for teens on traumatic grief, school age kids. So there's items at all developmental levels. And then there's also some resources for psychological first aid, so that are a little more therapeutically focused, some suggestions for mobile apps. And then, of course, kind of not on that resource list, but I always say to any parent with a child who's struggling over a long period of time is really to also use resources that might be available through your schools. Most schools have some kind of school counseling available, or a private or community-based kind of therapist. I think that this is an important time to recognize that for some of us, for a lot of, I would say for the majority of parents and kids, we're going to emotionally kind of rebound from this. But for some, it's going to have a much more significant and longer term impact. And getting support, I think, for ourselves and for our children is really important. We do not have to do this alone.